She made history as the first American woman to summit Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen. But just hours after reaching the top, Frances vanished into the death zone, swallowed by the mountain, frozen in time for nearly a decade. Her disappearance became a haunting mystery until a British climber returned years later and did something no one else dared. What he discovered and what he chose to do next would change everything. Frances Argent was 40 years old, full of life, ambition. One would gain eternal fame, the other would vanish into thin air. And together, their story would become one of the most chilling mysteries to ever unfold on Everest. As the sun crested over the Himalayas on May 22, 1998, two tiny figures were still moving upward, when they should have already been descending. That morning, a fatal decision was made, a decision that would write both legend and tragedy into the ice. By late afternoon, Frances Argent achieved what no American woman had before her. She stood on the roof of the world, unaided by supplemental oxygen. But instead of triumph, there was only silence. Her body had been pushed past the brink. Every step was mechanical. Her energy was spent. Sergei by her side was in no better shape. They had reached the summit dangerously late. A mistake that Everest has punished many times over. The unwritten rule on that mountain is simple. Summiting is only halfway. Survival depends on the descent. As darkness fell and they began to make their way down, no one knew they were starting what would become one of the most heartbreaking separations in climbing history. Somewhere in the blackness, amidst the thin air and fatigue, the couple was split apart. By sunrise, Sergei stumbled into camp, alone. Frances was gone. Reality hit like an avalanche. His wife, his partner, the mother of their son Paul, still up there, alone, in trouble. Without pause, Sergei grabbed a tank of oxygen and whatever medicine he could find and headed back up into the death zone, determined to bring her back or die trying. It was the kind of reckless courage that earned him the name Snow Leopard. But Sergei had no idea. She had already been found. Hours earlier, a climbing team attempting the summit had spotted Frances. Barely conscious, frostbitten, and in critical condition, she was still alive. They offered her oxygen and tried to help her move, but they too were running on empty. No Sherpas, no backup, and little gear. With their own survival now at stake, they made the painful decision to descend. But not without trying to help in one final desperate way. They clipped her into a fixed rope, hoping it would keep her from sliding off the face of the mountain. That evening, as the team descended, they crossed paths with Sergei, still climbing, still searching for his wife in the darkness. They told him where to look. That was the last time anyone saw the Snow Leopard alive. What happened after remains one of Everest's most enduring mysteries. Did he reach her in time? Did they speak? Did he hold her hand in the end? Or did they both disappear into the endless snow, swallowed by the mountain they dared to challenge? No one knows for sure, and for years, no one would. The final discovery, when it came, would reveal not just a tragic fate, but the depth of a love that defied logic, time, and even death. On May 24, 1998, just 300 meters from the summit, British climber Ian Woodall and South African mountaineer Cathy O'Dowd were making their final push when Cathy spotted something strange. A flicker of purple fabric just off the trail. Then, a twitch. A subtle, unnatural movement in the shadows. Without hesitation, she turned to Ian and said, "I'm going to check it out." She had no idea the sight awaiting her would haunt her dreams for years. Nestled in a narrow, wind-blasted hollow, suspended awkwardly in a web of fixed lines, was the body of a woman. Her skin was pale, porcelain-like, with the eerie stillness of a porcelain doll. Her black hair fanned around her frost-bitten face, a strange beauty clinging to her despite the cruelty of the mountain. And then, the woman opened her eyes. "Please, don't leave me," she whispered. Her pupils were black voids in the thin air, her voice barely a ghost carried on the wind. Cathy froze. The woman looked familiar, heartbreakingly familiar. Same age, same build, same dream. For a chilling moment, Cathy felt like she was staring into her own future. "I'm American," the woman whispered. "Please help me." And just like that, they knew who she was. Frances Argent, the cheerful woman who had shared stories and tea with them back at base camp just days ago. The woman who had smiled when she spoke of her son, Paul. Now she was broken, freezing, dying, and clinging to the last thread of awareness. Ian and Kathy called their Sherpa team. They quickly located a discarded ice axe and rope nearby Sergei's. The snow leopard had made it that far. But there was no sign of him. Frances's oxygen tank, the one left by the previous team, was bone dry. Her gloves lay scattered, a sign of terminal hypothermia, when the body, in its confusion, starts shedding clothing in a last-ditch burst of heat. They tried everything. They cradled her. They held her upright, tried slipping her arms into jackets. Her limbs were limp, useless. When they attempted to stand her up, her legs collapsed beneath her like boiled noodles. "If you help us," Ian pleaded gently, "we can try to get you down. But if you can't, you won't make it." She stared at him blankly, alive, but somewhere far away. The mountain had already taken hold of her mind even before it stole her life. For over an hour, the team fought frostbite, altitude sickness, and a devastating truth. Any attempt to move her would likely result in all of them dying. The temperature had dropped to -30°C. The wind howled. Their own survival was slipping through their hands. And then she spoke again, a whisper, a question that cut deeper than any windburn. "Why are you doing this to me?" She didn't understand. She couldn't. In her oxygen-starved mind, she thought they were torturing her, not saving her. There was no discussion, no arguments, only a silent decision born of desperation. Even the climbers who had found her the day before had arrived at the same painful truth. She was too far gone. As they prepared to leave, Frances grew quiet. Her voice faded. Her body stilled. Kathy, once determined to summit, no longer cared. "I climb because I love it," she had once said. But now the summit felt like a cruel illusion. She had stared into the face of death, not her own but someone else's. And it had changed her. Frances Argent remained where she lay, frozen in time just below the top of the world, a place where dreams touch the sky and love dares to die trying. In the years that followed, Kathy O'Dowd would say something that stayed with those who heard her. "After seeing Fran, no summit could bring me joy again." They had left her there, still breathing, still clinging to the rope, still hoping. That was the last time anyone saw Frances Argent alive. But the mystery wasn't over. Far from it. While Frances's fate was tragically clear, Sergei's disappearance became one of Everest's most haunting enigmas. His last known sighting was from a team of Uzbek climbers who crossed paths with him as he ascended alone in the dark, carrying a tank of oxygen and a small pouch of medicine, determined to save the woman he loved. After that, he simply vanished into the thin, unforgiving air of the death zone. No one ever found his body. Climbers later discovered gear, rope, a pickaxe, supply bags, near where Frances had died, signs that Sergei may have reached her. But there was no sign of him, no body, no answers. Had he succumbed to exhaustion beside her? Had the mountain claimed him in silence, sweeping him into a crevasse or burying him under a silent snowfall? Back in Colorado, a 10-year-old boy named Paul waited for news that would never come. His mother's final letter, cheerful, handwritten, with a hand-drawn map of her Himalayan route, became a cruel relic of a dream-turned-nightmare. But Everest wasn't finished with Frances yet. Her body remained where she had fallen, high on the northern face, just off the main climbing route. Season after season, expedition after expedition, climbers from around the globe passed her. She became more than a victim. She became a fixture. Wrapped in her purple jacket, long black hair fanned out like a frozen halo, her face eerily peaceful. She looked less like a casualty and more like a fairy tale relic. They began to call her the Sleeping Beauty of Everest. Hundreds of climbers passed within feet of her. Some whispered prayers, others looked away, disturbed. A few snapped photos, turning her into a ghostly internet icon. To many, she was no longer Frances. She was just another waypoint on the way to the summit. Turn left at the woman in purple, some would say. Right at the guy in the green boots. There was no dignity in it. No humanity. Recovering a body from that height would cost between $40,000 and $100,000. It would risk more lives. Logistically brutal. Ethically murky. For nearly a decade, no one made the attempt. Until 2007. That year, someone finally said, enough. The man was Ian Woodall. The same climber who had once knelt beside Frances, who had heard her whisper through frozen lips, "Don't leave me here to die." He had left her. He had no choice. But he never forgot. 9 years later, he came back. Not to climb. not to conquer, but to keep a promise. He organized a bold and dangerous mission called the Everest Memorial Expedition. Its goal wasn't the summit, it wasn't glory, it was closure. What he planned had never been done before, a high-altitude recovery, not for fame, but for honor, not for science, but for peace. A chance to give a woman who died alone the final dignity she deserved, and perhaps to finally end the ghost story that had haunted the roof of the world for nearly a decade. This was no ordinary climb. What Ian Woodall set out to do had never been attempted at this level, not for glory, not for records, but for something far rarer on Everest: closure. His mission, 9 years in the making, would take him back to over 8,500 meters. A place so high, it's above nearly every mountain outside the Himalayas. But this time, the summit wasn't the goal. His only objective, to give Frances Argent the dignity she was denied for nearly a decade. The risks were immense. At that altitude, every movement feels like drowning. A misstep can be fatal. And moving a frozen human body, preserved in ice, stiff from years of exposure, would require physical strength, precision, and unwavering mental resolve. A single mistake could trigger a catastrophe. But Woodall had more than just resolve. He had a promise to keep. Back in 1999, a chilling discovery had rewritten the tragedy. During a separate expedition, climber Jake Norton had stumbled upon the answer to a lingering question. What happened to Sergei? Far below the ridge, Jake found the snow leopard. Sergei had reached Frances. Evidence near her, his ice axe, his rope, confirmed it. After the Uzbek team left her, Sergei made the impossible climb. He had tried to lift her, move her, maybe even carry her down. But the effort cost him everything. He fell, alone, and died where no one would find him for years. Frances, too weak to move on her own, had remained behind, unaware that her husband's final act of love had been his undoing. Now, in 2007, Woodall returned not just to honor Frances, but Sergei too. A couple who had died reaching for the stars, now frozen in a love story lost in the clouds. As his new expedition established base camp, Woodall addressed his team. "I always believed someone would eventually come back for her," he said quietly. "But at this altitude, you're either on your way up or on your way down. No one stops to bury the dead. That takes a mission built for nothing else." And this was that mission. Reaching Frances' location would take days. The work would be excruciating. Even breathing would feel like a battle. The weather window was slim. One unexpected storm, and the entire team could be trapped in the death zone, with no hope of rescue. But Woodall remembered her eyes, her voice, that final plea, "Don't leave me here to die." He had left her once. He wouldn't leave her again. On May 23, 2007, precisely 9 years to the day after Frances Argent spoke her final words, Ian Woodall stood beside her again. And nothing had changed. The mountain, in its eerie mercy, had preserved her like a moment trapped in ice. She looked as she had in 1998, lying still, skin pale, hair black and soft around her face, wrapped in that same purple jacket that had become a symbol to climbers from every corner of the globe. She looked like she was still asleep, waiting. But now, someone had come to wake her. Woodall and his team raised an American flag, planting it beside her in the rock as if to declare, "You are not forgotten." Then, with care and reverence, they began the delicate task of building a stone cairn around her body. Not to remove her, but to shield her. To give her a final resting place free from gawkers and cameras. To return to her the peace that Everest had stolen. It wasn't just a burial. It was a redemption. It was the moment when a promise made in the cold became a legacy written in stone. At 8,500 meters above sea level, in a place where even breathing feels like a battle, a quiet, solemn ceremony took place on the world's deadliest mountain. There were no crowds, no cameras, only the howling wind and the sound of hearts breaking. For the first time in 9 years, Frances Argent wasn't just a landmark on a death trail. She was seen for who she truly was. A mother, a dreamer, a woman who dared. The team draped a cloth gently over her body. They said a prayer. Then came the hardest part, the descent. Moving a frozen body at that altitude pushed the limits of human endurance. Every step demanded staggering physical effort. The air was thin, every movement a struggle. But they pressed on, not out of obligation, but devotion. This wasn't about logistics. This was about grace. Carefully, reverently, they transported Frances down the ridge, away from the main climbing route. Slowly they carried her out of the public eye, out of the endless stream of boots and stairs and viral photographs. They found a quiet ledge, hidden from the path, and there, under the raw sky, they built her a resting place. A cairn of stone, a tomb of dignity. For the first time since 1998, those ascending the north face of Everest would no longer pass the Sleeping Beauty in the snow. She would no longer be part of a grim tour. She was finally laid to rest, not as a waypoint, but as a person. Later, Woodall would reflect on the mission. "This will be my last expedition," he said, "and I think it's only right that I repay something." But what he accomplished went far beyond that. This wasn't just about relocating a body. It was about rewriting a legacy, about honoring not just Frances, but Sergei as well. Two climbers, two dreamers, a husband and wife who dared the impossible together and paid the ultimate price. She had reached her goal. Frances Argent was the first American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen, a feat few ever attempted, and even fewer survived. And Sergei? He could have saved himself. But instead he chose to climb back into hell. For love. His death wasn't an accident. It was a choice, a sacrifice, a final act of devotion. And Ian Woodall, the man who once walked away from Frances as she begged not to be left behind, returned, years later, to give her what the mountain had taken: peace. Back home, Paul DiStefano, the boy who kissed his mother goodbye at age 10, was now a grown man. He carried with him more than just the memory of her final letter. He carried the knowledge that strangers had cared enough to risk their lives so that his mother wouldn't be remembered as a roadside corpse, but as a woman of strength, of fire, of purpose. Frances' story echoes long after the winds quiet down. It reminds us that the greatest triumphs often carry the highest costs, that love can drive us to defy reason, that even on Everest, even on the cruelest, most unforgiving peak on Earth, compassion can conquer indifference. She vanished in 1998, swallowed by ice and time. But in 2007, a man who had once heard her last words returned, not to climb, but to keep a promise that honor demanded, and few would dare to fulfill. And in doing so, he gave the Sleeping Beauty of Everest something no summit ever could. He gave her peace.